Welcome to the 12th session of the KIPS Distance Learning Program Current Affairs Newspaper Roundup session. I am your host Shahrukh Haider, and today we are going to discuss some important developments that have been happening in the world in the wake of the COVID-19 global pandemic crisis. So first of all, let's talk about the developments in the Afghan peace process. Due to the international pandemic of COVID-19 and the ensuing lockdown and the shift in priorities of global governments, the attention that was previously being given to the Afghan peace process and the idea that it was being fast-tracked was put on the back burner, which is why the Afghan peace process was stalling. But now, since everybody realizes that due to the pandemic, it is extremely important at this point in time that certain measures are taken to ensure that a pandemic breakout does not happen in Afghanistan, especially with all the prisoners that have been cooped up into small prison zones as far as the Taliban prisoners are concerned and the Afghan government prisoners are concerned. Therefore, more push has been given towards the parties involved in the Afghan peace process to ensure that the prisoners' release starts happening as an important confidence building measure in order to ensure that the Afghan government and the Taliban generate enough confidence building measures amongst themselves so that an Afghan-led and an Afghan-owned intra-Afghan dialogue can finally start that could potentially lead to a sustainable political settlement in Afghanistan and allow American forces to completely withdraw from this region as they have promised. So a little word on the 29th February peace deal that was basically signed between American representatives being represented by Zalmay Khalilzad, American Special Ambassador to Afghanistan, and by Mullah Baradar, who is the prime and key negotiator on behalf of the Taliban, and this deal was signed in Doha. So an important article or condition in the deal that was signed was that the Afghan government would release up to 5,000 Taliban prisoners, and in return of that, the Taliban will release up to 1,500 Afghan prisoners. And this was to be an important confidence building measure that would then lead towards dialogue between the two warring sides. However, that did not happen as it was envisioned in the peace deal. Now, the primary reason for that was because the Kabul government, the Afghan Ghani administration, felt that the only momentum and the only kind of leverage that they had against the Taliban was given up by the United States administration without even any consultation with the Afghan government, and they were left without any ground to negotiate with the Taliban on, which is why they refused to give up the 5,000 Taliban prisoners, and they said that if we are to ever give up prisoners, there should be a dialogue before that, and there should be a complete ceasefire and a total reduction in violence on behalf of the Taliban. However, the Taliban, signaled that if the Afghan government continues on the current trajectory of rejecting the prisoner swap, then we are completely not going to go for a peace deal, and it will be stalled and violence will continue, and the Afghan people will continue to be hounded by the ever-present war in their homes. So this is when General Miller, the primary general responsible for US presence in Afghanistan, and Zalmay Khalilzad only 2 days ago met with the Chief of Army Staff of Pakistan Armed Forces, General Bajwa, and as you might realize by now that whenever there is an impasse in the Afghan peace process, usually the High Command responsible for the Afghan peace process from the American sides meets the Foreign Minister of Pakistan and especially the Chief of Army Staff, and then somehow magically things come back on track and something good happens. And that is exactly what happened after the talks between General Bajwa and General Miller and Zalmay Khalilzad, because after that the Afghan government agreed to release 200 prisoners, actually 300 Taliban prisoners, and in response and return of that gesture, the Taliban agreed to release 20 prisoners. So this is some progress, and perhaps this progress could lead to further progress in prisoner swap, which could build enough confidence between the two warring sides to come onto the negotiation table and talk about a conflict-free, a violence-free future Afghanistan society that would bring not just stability in Afghanistan but the broader region, but also socio-economic prosperity throughout the region through the various energy projects that have been halted due to the constant violence in Afghanistan. So one of the important sort of motivation forces for the Taliban and the Afghan government to agree to a prisoner swap has also been fears that the COVID-19 crisis might just have a breakout in the prisoner cells and in the prisons of the Taliban and the Afghan government. That would be disastrous for the entire Afghan society, and it would be completely impossible for the almost non-existent faltering healthcare system of Afghanistan to deal with such a level of crisis, as most advanced societies with the most advanced and complicated and comprehensive health systems have also failed to contain the pandemic. So now let's talk about the COVID-19, since we're on that topic. So the worst hit country from the COVID-19 crisis has been the United States. There are more than 650,000 patients of coronavirus in America right now, and they've already had more than 30,000 deaths, and on average they're having more than 2,000 deaths a day, and nearly 25,000 or more than that new cases recorded every day. So since the Trump administration, everyone agrees now, was completely unable to contain the situation and prevent a major breakout in the United States, and because of Trump's economic priorities and his unwillingness to basically close down American economy and affect a total lockdown, Trump has now turned to other tactics in order to sort of avoid the blame that has been put upon his administration for mismanaging the COVID-19 crisis. Now, in order to do that, what he's actually doing is he's shifting the blame onto other parties. For example, on a number of occasions in public hearings and media briefings, Trump has accused China of spreading this virus and has named this virus as the Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus. And as a matter of fact, to some extent, there is some credibility to his claims, because recent government secret documents released from China, the Wuhan province, have revealed to the world that the Chinese authorities in Wuhan did not inform the Chinese people or the world for at least 6 days after they realized that they might just be, experiencing a pandemic of global proportions which is going to spread soon. They already realized that, but did not let the world know about it at least for 6 days, which amounts to criminal intent, right? But the fact of the matter is that Trump's criticism of China is unfounded. What he's trying to do is he is trying to shift the blame from his own administration to any foreign party, to any alien entity, which is something that Trump is very accustomed of doing, because primarily his base agrees with these ideas that every problem that the United States faces is not of its own creation, but another foreign party or an alien party is responsible for those things. And Trump has on a large scale been successful in propagating this sort of narrative again and again in multiple crisis situations. And this really tells you the amount of intelligence that the American populace has, especially the people who voted for Trump in 2016. And another part of the blame game that Trump has initiated is against the World Health Organization. He has blamed the World Health Organization for having a very sharp sort of bias towards China and covering up China's mistakes and supporting China's efforts beyond that. My apologies. Beyond than they should have been supported. And he has basically threatened to withhold all of the $400 million funding that the United States does to the World Health Organization. Now, this is not the first time that Trump administration and Trump in particular has attacked multilateral institutions and international cooperative mechanisms. He has done that before in the case of Human Rights Council of the United Nations, blaming it for having a bias against Israel, and a number of other occasions. He has also undermined many other multilateral institutes, agreements and collective action and cooperation around the world. For example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a free trade agreement, the largest of its kind ever in the history of the world, between 12 largest economic blocs of the world. He withdrew America out of it. Then he withdrew America from the Iran nuclear deal. Then he withdrew America from the Paris Climate Agreement. So Trump's diatribe has been directed towards withdrawing from multilateral efforts for cooperative action from international cooperation on important key issues. And that is essentially what he's doing here as well, because this really appeals to his electoral base. Now, this is especially important because in 1 year's time, American elections are coming up, and there are good chances that if the current rate of trajectory of the coronavirus keeps on going in America and they have more fatalities and the number of deaths increase, let's say from 100,000, there are good chances that the American public will blame the Trump administration for mishandling the crisis, and Trump will lose the next election to the next Democratic candidate, who has become unanimously Joe Biden. So let's talk about Joe Biden. So Joe Biden was one of the running candidates for the candidacy of the Democratic Party for the next presidential elections in 2021 in America. His closest rivals were Warren Buffett and Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders, right, he's an important figure in American politics. He represents something very important in politics in general. He is someone who is revered by the young population of America because he represents socialist values. He believes in collective ownership of society. He believes in a universal free healthcare system. He believes in universal and very high basic income. He believes in healthcare for all, labor protections, market regulations, and a government that is responsible for taking care of its citizens at every step of the way. And this is essentially what a social democracy is about. And he is a staunch advocate of a Green New Deal. Now, we'll talk about the Green New Deal in perhaps another lecture, because that's also an interesting idea. But anyhow, Bernie Sanders was an important figure. However, Bernie Sanders has lost his race for candidacy of the Democratic Party to Joe Biden, which is quite frankly a loss for the American people, because Bernie Sanders believed in redistribution of wealth, taking wealth from the super elite and distributing it among the poor and the working classes to allow them to live a better standard of life and perhaps even achieve the American dream, which is something that Republicans and a Republican candidate will never ensure, because a Republican is all about, enriching the already rich classes of America and widening the wealth gap, which is something that the world collectively is facing right now, which has really generated the anti-globalization and the anti-neoliberal movement around the world as well. But anyhow, more on that later. In similar developments, the former, leader of the Labour Party of the United Kingdom, Jeremy Corbyn, has also resigned from his post as the leader of the Labour Party, and a more conservative and a less radical politician has replaced him as a leader of the Labour Party. Now, this is also very interesting and important in the very context of Bernie Sanders, because like Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn is also an advocate of social democracy, an advocate of human rights, an advocate of wealth redistribution and equality and equity in society. Something that the entire world needs right now, because the top 10 billionaires of the world own more wealth than the smallest 100 economies of the world combined. That is outrageous, absolutely outrageous. Billionaires should not exist in a world where there is poverty, where there is hunger, where there is thirst and absolute abject poverty, so prevalent in the society to the extent that at least 1/3 of humanity lives under squalid conditions, without access to food, nutritious food, potable water, housing, and any of the basic fundamental human rights that are important for maintaining human dignity and that every human being deserves as a birthright. So with that said, I believe that with the passing of Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders, an important shift has taken place in Western liberal democracies. And that shift is a reduction in confidence in collective ownership, a reduction in confidence in empowering the working classes, and basically a victory for the super rich elites who are intent upon stealing wealth from the poor classes, from the working classes, and maximizing their own profits. That is exactly what free market fundamentalism is all about. So, finally, two important other movements that have generated in the world right now due to the COVID-19 crisis have been an important international campaign especially by the developing countries, to push the developed world and international financial institutions to provide debt or loan relief to these countries who are burdened by debt. Now, the G20 summit, which comprises of the top largest 20 economies of the world, has already announced such a debt relief fund for the global south, for the developing countries of the world, and Pakistan was recently included in that as well. Now, let me read an extract from the Daily Dawn about this scenario. So, Pakistan included in G20 debt relief plan. Pakistan has been included in the group of countries eligible for debt relief on all principal and interest payments to official bilateral creditors announced by the G20 countries in their Riyadh meeting on Wednesday. Riyadh, because Saudi Arabia is also one of the 20 richest economies of the world. The G20 grouping had been urged by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to extend debt relief to the poorest countries to free up their resources for the COVID-19 related challenges ahead. So why do you think that suddenly the G20 countries, the developed countries, the rich countries care about the developed world? Well, there's an important reason for that, because you must understand that majority of the sales of multinationals that belong to the developed world, such as America, go into the developing countries. These developing countries from the largest markets for the goods and services of Western and developed world multinational companies. And if these economies fail, the developing economies, these multinational industries would fall, and their fall would dramatically impact the economic health of the developed world. So in a globalized world, no one can afford to have half of the world having its entire economy collapse, because that would have a damning impact on the rest of the world as well. So the West is really taking care of its own interests by providing debt relief to the developing countries, because you must remember in the end, because one of the main reasons for the developed status of the Western world, especially Europe, and the amount of modernity and economic prosperity, socio-economic prosperity that they have achieved, is basically the at least 200 to 300 years of systematic exploitation of the developing world by the colonial powers. They extracted and stole the wealth of developing world, such as the subcontinent, which is known to them as the golden bird, and took them back into their own countries to build their own country, right? So it is important for them to ensure that these countries still are a source of wealth for the developed world. Before, there was colonialism, which was a direct imposition of a system by a foreign power. Now there is neo-colonialism or imperialism, where there is not direct imposition of foreign control by developed countries in the developing world, but there is indirect economic control, and the international financial institutions are the primary tools that are used by the developed world in order to ensure that developing countries are stuck in a constant cycle of economic dependence upon Western-backed international financial institutions and Western economies and multinational organizations. In the next lecture, we're going to discuss how will the COVID-19 global pandemic change the world substantially on an economic, political and social level. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. Thank you for your patience. Be sure to click show more in the video below for related content. Thank you. See you again.